So I've heard people talking about this 50-cent indie game that's apparently better than Zelda, specifically Tears of the Kingdom, which is a bit hard to believe looking at the price difference, but it is interesting. And I like interesting things, so I decided to look into this. And I've gotta say, the indie game was doing some things that had me gasping out loud, while Tears of the Kingdom left me feeling indifferent at times. Strange, right? I do like both games a great deal, though you'd think that the big expensive AAA game would be the more exciting one. What's going on here? To figure this out, I'll start by looking at the indie game. What kind of game even is it? What is it doing right? Hi, I'm Stijn, project lead at Frog Vibes, known for Here Comes Niko, and currently working on $5 for the bus. The indie game I'm talking about is called Mini and Max. And I should probably mention that the game is only 50 cents on a technicality. This is because it's part of UFO 50, an amazing collection of 50 fantastic indie games. UFO 50 being $25 makes it 50 games for 50 cents each. And while I did not lie, the video title might have been a tad deceptive. And it is because of this that I want to publicly apologize for being a sneaky little guy. But MiniMX is an amazing game that does some jaw-dropping stuff, and you should absolutely play it. Be warned though, I'll be spoiling some of it as I go on. So, the game begins with Minnie and her dog Max getting locked in a storage room, making the main objective of the game to find a way out of this room. Hold it. I was hoping to get more than a sentence in before I started blabbering, but here we are. Get out of the storage room. Right from the get-go, we get our end goal for the game. Sound familiar? This is something Zelda Breath of the Wild got a lot of praise for. It was a big deal to give the objective Destroy Ganon, and then to have the player figure out how to go about that. Everything you accomplish in the game is helping you get strong enough to face Ganon. This is actually part of the designers at the time wanted to take inspiration from the original Zelda 1 on the NES. The Gather the Triforce and then Destroy Ganon changed just slightly into Destroy Ganon, and Gather the Divine Beasts if you like. MiniMX's goal is similar in that sense, as will become clear when I finally get on with the overview. In comparison, Tears of the Kingdom's main goal of Find Princess Zelda sounds similarly concise, though in practice it's less clear how what you do in the game relates to this goal. Find Zelda? Well, I guess I could look around for her while I do other stuff, and sure. The majority of the side quests are about finding Zelda, though it quickly becomes all too clear that they are all just red herrings. Even when immersed in the world, it's hard to believe that the lady who grows carrots actually saw Zelda behind that tree. And that once we look, the credits will roll. Anyhow, where was I? Minnie and her dog Max are still locked in that storage room. Out of frustration, Minnie throws a mirror against the wall, breaking it into many shards. This will turn out to be an important moment in the game's lore somehow. The duo then discovers the power of shrinking by way of crouching down and thinking small thoughts. Them now being tiny turns the storage room into a large open world for you to explore. A world filled with a wide array of creatures, characters, and even cultures. Not to mention the shards that broke from the mirror, which have now turned into a valuable currency called shinies. There are a bunch of little things that the game does that make it a unique open world experience. But I'd first like to note its quest design. Like most open world games, MiniMX has quests, but it doesn't have a task list shaped quest log. Its developer has opted to exclude it in favor of a masterful use of breadcrumbs, among other things. By breadcrumbs I mean the little things that point the player towards a quest in a natural way. Things like characters talking about events in the world, giving cryptic directions as to where things can be found, but also non-verbal environmental storytelling. Often a single quest will have it vaguely mentioned by a few characters, and then with more comprehensive clues as you get physically closer to the subject. To actually complete a quest, players are left to learn more and more about the world, its cultures, its history, important characters, and even industries. The more they learn, the easier it is to figure out what to do. An essential pillar to make this fun is of course that the world itself should be fun to learn about. MiniMX excels at this. It's wildly interesting to learn about how all these different creatures build miniature and even microscopic societies, and how the house's residents, the big people, have an effect on them. Like Minnie herself, who by breaking the mirror introduced a new currency, which in turn induces trade and war into the miniature world's societies. There are even religions denouncing the shinies, for they merely reflect the light that was given to them by their most holy giver of light, the storage room lamp. A good example of the game's quest design is the quest that takes place between the two Elgian cities. These two microscopic cities are located on the two neighboring potted plants. There's a lot of trade that happens between the cities, though due to the, to them, enormous gap between the pots, this trade has to happen through air travel. Tiny flights piloted by tinier algae people. The two cities are actually on the verge of war, as it seems the western city is refusing to send an important shipment. The player learns all this and more by simply exploring the two cities on their own accord. They might also learn that it's not unheard of for a flight to crash, fly piloting being a dangerous business. This fact might entice players to look around the flight route, where they can discover this disturbing crash site, as well as the precious cargo. By bringing the cargo to its destination, the player will be able to prevent war between the cities. Isn't that sick as hell? What is effectively bringing some cargo to a guy is infused with exploration and discovery by obscuring the actual task in an intriguing narrative. And you don't even need a sat-nav to do it. Simply put, figuring out what to do is the fun part, and figuring it out on your own is incredibly satisfying. Before moving on to other cool design tidbits, I want to take a moment to dissect this, in order to get a better understanding of the anatomy of such a quest. Why? Because we're working on an open world game right now and I want to learn some stuff. I promise to get back to the tier list or rant or whatever video I was making afterwards. And I promise this will be just as fun. So, the way I see it, we've got the following parts.
The breadcrumbs.
Open world games are largely about exploration, and as I've talked about in this other video, exploration isn't fun without some direction. Whether it's an actual literal path that leads somewhere, or NPCs trying to make small talk, reminiscing about their hometown to the east. These paths, directions, breadcrumbs, they all give the player a more meaningful choice of where to go. Deciding to go east or west is meaningless without a hint at what may lie there. Mini-MX is filled with characters from different origins talking about the world and its often hidden cities. The density of breadcrumbs has an effect on the player's experience too, by the way. Too few will make the world feel directionless. Too many can lead to decision fatigue or apathy. To me, Breath of the Wild does this exceptionally well, with the way it leads players to the different cities. Mini-MX does it massively too. Next on the list,
The core objective.
The core objective is what you physically need to do to complete the quest. Taking the Elgian quest as an example, the core objective would be to go to the crash site, pick up the cargo, then go to the chief who ordered it, put it down and talk to him. Again, this is very simple, but in a way that's good. Remember, between these actions there's still game. Moving through the world is fun. Also remember that the player won't inherently know that these are the actions that they need to do. One thing that can make things a bit more complex is that it's also possible to have multiple core objectives, letting the player decide which one to actually execute. You know, meaningful choices and stuff. And finally,
The clues.
Clues. These obscure and fragment the core objective. Obscure as in to tell in an intentionally roundabout or cryptic way. Fragment as in to cut into multiple pieces to be spread out and examined individually. The Elgian quest is accompanied by a lot of lore, told from different perspectives. The way an NPC talks about the situation is different depending on which town they're from and their social class. A soldier might be complaining about their moody king, for example. The clues have an effect on the difficulty of the quest, making the information vague, cutting it into more and more pieces, having the solution be implied through an understanding of the narrative. These things can make figuring out the core objective quite tough. Luckily, it can also be made easier. For example, having repetition can make sure that part of the fragmented solution isn't missed. When repeating the information, restating it in a different way will also make it more likely for players to pick up on what they need to know. Different clues make sense to different people, so it's valuable to have the same information present in multiple kinds of clues. This works well because players who pick up on it quickly can move on to the core objective, while still making sure that it is less likely for other players to run out of information and give up. Looking at it, I think part of what makes a quest setup like this good is that it comes with 3 distinct eureka moments. The first comes from finding the thing or place the breadcrumbs we're talking about. The second, from that moment the clues start to fit together and you know what you ought to do. And the third, from actually doing it and discovering that you were in fact very clever and correct. I think that just about covers it. Thinking about these elements and how they interplay should help us make exciting quests for $5 for the bus. A game you should wishlist on Steam if you like this sort of stuff. I'll get to how the game holds up against Zelda in a bit, but there's some cool stuff I want to show off first. For example, the way MiniMax goes about fast travel is amazing. So you start off the game in a small storage room, right? Then you shrink and the storage room becomes this huge open world. The thing is, you can simply become big again. So instead of selecting an icon on a map, you just become big, jump to where you roughly want to be, and then you become small again. You're controlling the character throughout the whole process. It becomes even wilder once you gain the ability to shrink even smaller, to a microscopic size. This makes the world even huger. Every square in this image is a sizable area. Zoomed in, every square in this image is a tiny level. And the way you move through these different scales makes navigating the game a breeze. It's also a lot more fun than using menus. And with this system, the game's designer also got a really interesting way to make different locations harder to reach. Because at your biggest, there are still places you can't reach. So you have to venture there while small. This is such a cool concept. Another thing the game does, which I don't think I've seen before, is that it lets you gain significant upgrades in insignificant places. With such a huge world, it's easy for the majority of it to become uninteresting. But in MiniMax you can become microscopic in a random spot, only to find some sort of puzzle that grants you a boot that lets you kick enemies. And that's quite the upgrade. When I first came across this phenomenon, I went, Because as a game designer I wouldn't dream of creating this cool feature, only for it to be in a spot where no one might ever find it. Well, MiniMax goes about this in a super clever way, with a bit of smoke and mirrors, because the same upgrade can actually be found in multiple places. So the moment you get it, the other spots where it could be found now grant cash, which is always nice to get. The real benefit to this trick is that it builds the expectation that something amazing could be around any corner. Finally, what the game does really well is how it makes its environment increasingly useful. A lot of the upgrades you get relate to how you interact with the environment. You'll look differently at things you've seen before because the ways in which you can interact with them have expanded. You start the game only being able to pick up blocks. This makes throwing stuff at enemies the only way to defeat them. Later you can pick up enemies, allowing you to defeat enemies by throwing other enemies at them, and at some point you get a backpack allowing you to store things you pick up, to then use them wherever and whenever you need. A lot of the challenges the game throws at you can be approached in many different ways, depending on the stuff you've got in your backpack. An upgrade that makes this even cooler allows you to stand on, and thus ride, enemies, and another allows you some limited control over their behavior. Now you can grab a grasshopper or a virus from your bag, and then use their unique abilities to your advantage. The way the behaviors of these different materials and enemies all mix together to form new possibilities reminds me of how the Breath of the Wild developers used to talk about their chemistry engine. So with all that, is MiniMax better than Zelda? That's subjective, of course. They're very different games after all. For me, if we were looking at Breath of the Wild, my preference would probably go out to Zelda. A lot of what MiniMax does well, it too excels at, just at a larger scale. If we were looking at Tears of the Kingdom, I wouldn't be so sure. I'd probably go with MiniMax, as my experience with it has been much more positive. While Tears of the Kingdom is wildly impressive and very fun at times, the experience as a whole is a bit messy. The sheer amount of fluff content ends up hiding the more interesting quests. The game has so much content, in fact, they ended up dividing the quest log into good quests and boring quests. If you'd ask me, just leave out the boring stuff, so the good stuff has room to breathe. Otherwise, the breadcrumbs and clue system ends up less effective. But again, it's all subjective. I know plenty of people who are ready to dive into all there is to do. As a side note, I actually feel that Zelda Echoes of Wisdom balances things a bit better. Anyway, what do you think? Have you played MiniMax? Did you like it? Which of the games I talked about is your favorite? And why? I'd love to know, so do comment below. Also, join our Discord. You can chat with me and the community. We even have a book club for games called Game Club. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. Bye bye. Please don't get mad at me for being harsh to your favorite game. I didn't mean it, I promise. But if you do want to get mad at me in the comments. I've heard that's like good for engagement or something. Maybe like add something nice. So you could comment, "F you, Zelda is the best game ever. But we're chill and you're a cool dude. And I'm proud of you. You know, bye."